Hey guys, welcome back. I am Chris with Marksman Shooting Sports and WeBuyGuns.com in Westfield, Indiana, and you are watching Marksman TV. Welcome back to another weekly used gun review. Remember, in these videos, we take about 8 used firearms that have come into the store and give you guys about a 2 to 4 minute review of each, giving you guys an idea of some different stuff out there on the market. Remember, the point of this video is strictly to be entertaining and educational. We are not making this video to sell anything, to keep in accordance with YouTube's policies. Also, please remember to like, share, and subscribe. It really does help us out with the YouTube algorithm. It helps get us a little bit more traffic on these videos. Anyway, guys, with all of that out of the way, let's go ahead and jump into it now. Alright, this video is brought to you by our new website, WeBuyGuns.com. If you are considering selling a firearm or firearms collection, please consider logging on to our website, create an account, and submit your firearms for an offer request. With that offer, you will be provided with an offer certificate, which you can print and take with you to competing gun stores to try and leverage yourself a better deal. If you're unable to get a better deal, go ahead and sell it to us. We do provide you with a shipping label, and we do pay you with either a paper check or ACH direct deposit to make the process as seamless and easy for you as possible. Remember, go check us out at WeBuyGuns.com. Remember, the format of this video is we start with most common and move through least common as the video progresses. Starting us off is a really cool Smith & Wesson J-frame model 442-38 special, and this particular one is a no dash with a nickel finish. Now, the 442s were typically in a blued finish. The 642s would have been stainless, but this is an early nickel from the early 1990s and is in really good condition, showing very, very little signs of use or wear, and there's no flaking on the nickel or anything like that. Now, the 442 would come about from Smith & Wesson in 1990 as part of their Centennial line and was first released in a stainless steel construction, making it a little bit heavier. In 1995, they would move to an aluminum alloy, making it part of the Airweight line, which was quite a bit lighter than this, so this is actually predates the 442 Airweight. Also, in 1996, they would reinforce the frame, making it Plus P compatible. So most of the 442s you see on the market now are aluminum alloy. They do say Airweight. They are Plus P rated, and they do have a frame lock on this side. The frame lock was actually added in 2001 with the Dash 2 model. It was the Dash 1 in 1996 where it would get the reinforced frame for plus P ammunition. So this is very, very, very early pre-Airweight, pre-lock, and pre-plus P. So if you do get something like this, you have to be a little bit careful with the ammunition that you carry in it, but still a really cool collectible piece that is not too often seen anymore on the market. I've always been a fan of the Smith & Wesson J-frames, which did get its debut with the Model 36 in the 1950s. So ever since then, it's really been a staple of concealed carry in the revolver line ever since. When it comes to the little J-frames, the 642, the 637, the 442, they have always been really, really good sellers in our store. Now, typically brand new, you can get them for about the $400 to $450 range. Used, you're typically in about the $300 to $400 range. Something like this, which is a little bit more collectible, as far as the little J-frames can be collectible. Something like this in this condition without the box might be in about the high 3s, low 4s in terms of condition, or in terms of value, excuse me. With the box, it would have obviously increased a little bit of that, but still a really, really cool, very unique firearm. Happy to get this in. This one actually comes to us from a local customer here in Indiana, so happy to get that one in and share it with you guys. Okay, up next I have a really cool firearm that comes to us from a viewer in Virginia, so thank you so much for sending this one along to us. This is the Taurus Model 692 Tracker, which is a convertible 357-38 to 9mm cylinder with a really, really quick cylinder conversion mechanism, which is actually pretty cool. Now, this would actually hit the market from Taurus just a few years ago in about 2018, 2019. And actually, for what it is a very, very well built, very rugged, durable revolver with a lot of different utility to it. This particular one is in a 3-inch barrel in the matte black finish. They also make it in a matte stainless, and it does have an aftermarket grip on here. It does have a nice wide spur hammer and a very wide spur trigger, and with this grip on it, it's actually incredibly comfortable and ergonomic. The cylinder capacity here is 7 rounds. Does have adjustable sights on the rear, and it is ventilated up here at the front with a nice, very high vis front sight post. Now, if we look at the the cylinder change mechanism, you're just going to drop open the cylinder, and on the right hand side of the frame, there is a little button that you push that will allow you to then pull the cylinder right off of the revolver. You can then take your 9mm cylinder in this instance, pop it back in the same way, and boom, just like that, I'm converted over to 9mm, which is just so cool. It's a really, really cool design. Just gives you a lot of use out of the firearm, especially in times like these where ammunition is not quite available. There is a lot of, if you have a good stockpile of 9mm but you can't find 357 or vice versa, there's a lot of utility that you can get out of something like this. Also, whether you want to use it for 9mm and 38 for target plinking, but you want to use 357 as your defensive, EDC, that option is there as well. Again, I can't, stress enough, this is just very, very overbuilt, very heavy in terms of what it is. So would probably, especially in 9mm and 38 special, be a very, very comfortable firearm to shoot and learn on. They make a larger barrel length on this one as well. On the market, these are selling in used condition. This one's a little rough, a little bit of wear on it, but these in excellent condition I'm seeing sell in about the 700 or so range used. Lower end of that, we see these sell between maybe $550. So somewhere between $500 and $700 is pretty standard depending on condition. So if you are able to find one on the used market, especially again in anywhere in the $500 to $700 range with a convertible cylinder, really, really cool, versatile package that can see many different applications. So happy to get this in. I've never actually had one of these in stock before, so glad to get this opportunity to handle one. It's actually something that's pretty impressive. Also, when it comes to Taurus, I've always really liked the revolvers, what they offer at the price. The semi-autos never been too much of a fan of, other than the like the G2, the G3 series. I do like those, but their revolvers I've always been very happy with. I've owned several, I've sold several, so really, really good quality products, and I definitely like them. So thanks for sending this one along to us. Okay, up next is a really cool rifle. This is a model 1891 Argentinian Mauser that comes to us from a local customer. Now, the story with this would actually begin back with the model 1871 developed by Peter Paul and Wilhelm Mauser of the Mauser Company. Their very, very famous design of this particular action, which would later on go on to be one of the most popularly sort of converted or modified actions to be used for both military service and sports use as well, even to today. Now, this design iteration would actually be one of the first sort of modern iterations of the Mauser action. The model 1871 was black powder, but when they would get through to 1880, there was a growing demand for advancement and forward thinking in arms development around the world. The Mauser company, especially Peter Paul and Wilhelm Mauser, decided that they wanted to be more strategically placed as a company to offer a really, really good, viable military firearm, for the growing demand in this market. Now, around that time, unfortunately, Wilhelm Mauser would pass away, which would throw sort of a wet blanket over their plans to develop these rifles, but Peter Paul would go on to develop much of this design. There were two different design iterations with the development of the stock and also the barrel contours. But one of the important, actually three important innovations of this was one, the adoption of smokeless powder and their new round, the 7.65 by 53, which is what this is chambered in. Number two is it was the first of the Mauser actions to implement a stripper clip feeding system, which is actually very new and innovative at the time. It was really the Mannlicher clip style that was most commonly seen as a fixed feeding system for a repeating bolt action rifle. The third was this protruding magazine, so you could top off, you could fill it up with 5 rounds, which gave you a lot of what I should say, capacity really for what was considered at the time. This was the older lugs at the forward of the bolt face, so not as strong as later iterations of the design, and also a 2-position safety, which would later be changed in the more refined 98 series of the Mauser action. Now, this was actually first adopted by Belgium. So Belgium at the time was looking at revamping their military rifle series, and instead of coming up with a whole new homegrown design, they had settled on what they were watching in the development of this pattern, and they developed it as the 1889. Now, FN in Belgium would actually submit their own designs, which would lose out to the Mauser action. However, FN was given license to create the Mauser action, which they did, until later, Belgium would be occupied by Germany, and sort of the rest is history there. Now, we get into the 1891 Argentina, who at the time had been issuing the rolling block rifles, which you guys saw in a previous video, wanted to also modernize their military, and they were taking note of this really cool and innovative Mauser action, the 1889 model. So in 1891, they would actually go with these. Now, this was really in 1886 when the Argentine Small Arms Commission would set out to find a new modernized rifle, and again by 1891 they had settled exactly on this pattern. They also settled on a carbine variation as well. that had a lot of the same similar features, but of course, being the new 765 by 53 smokeless powder being sort of all of the craze around this development by Mauser, they would implement that cartridge as well. In fact, it is not as commonly found as 8mm Mauser, but it is still manufactured today, so you can find it. So anyway, really cool firearm, really interesting development. Sort of, this is a really interesting stepping stone when you look at Mauser development in general. This is also the pattern that would be adopted by Turkey as well, so you could find those very long similar action as well. Now these are not super expensive. You can find these are usually found in really good condition, between about maybe $300 and $400 or so. This particular one's all matching, does have its handguard on it. Now on all of these you're also going to find the crest, the Argentinian crest, scrubbed off the top of it. That was something that Argentina tended to do when they removed something from service. Had something to do with a conflict with Chile when a lot of these would go onto service, or something. I'm not too privy to that whole line of why that happened, but I do know that sort of signifying removal from their service, they would remove the crest. But very interesting nonetheless. Happy to get that in and share it with you guys. Okay, up next is a really cool rifle that comes to us from a local customer. This is a Marlin Model 336W, and this one is chambered in 30-30. Now, the history with this would actually begin back in about 1873 when Winchester would come out with their very popular model, the 1873 Winchester. Now, that was, of course, predated by the Henry 1860, the Winchester 1866, but the 1873 was really the first really big, wide-scale, commercially successful rifle of this type. Now, through the 70s into the 80s, that would lead to a tremendous amount of demand for a rifle in this type of configuration for hunting purposes, target, sports use, military application, and there were a lot of different companies trying to come up with their own designs off of this concept. Now, that would enter Marlin in about 1881 when they would first come out with their first design on the lever action, which, like the Winchester designs, was top eject and was initially offered in very large calibers and black powder, mainly for hunting purposes. Now, by 1888, they had a secondary variation of this model that was really much the same thing and worked very much the same way, but was built for small caliber cartridges as well. Now, by 1890, Henry would bring on a very talented gunsmith known as Lewis Hepburn, which would get to work trying to conceptualize of how they can make this action different from competitors, more robust, and more have a better sales sort of appeal out there on the market. So one of the greatest things that he had designed was the closed top lever action design that would side eject. This would make the construction a lot more rigid. It would make it less affected by elements like cold or whether you have dust or debris that can get into the top of the action, and was really a monumental success. The first model that would implement this design was the 1891, which was a rimfire design. We can thank that for later iterations leading into the 39 and 39A, which in my opinion is one of the best 22 lever action firearms on the market. But then by 1893, they would come out with the larger caliber variations and things that were typically offered in the Winchester lineup. So like the 30-30 being a really big one, like the Winchester 1894. So the sort of the 1893 and the Winchester 1894 became very popular deer hunting rifles. Now, this would stay in production with Marlin from 1893 all the way up to 1936, when it would see a couple design changes. Most notably, they would make some design changes to the stock, have different caliber offerings, and this again was just prior to the Second World War. Now, when World War II would kick off in the 1940s, of course, they would cease production. And then post-World War II would get back to the drawing board on how they could come out with a new revised version of this rifle. So in the early 1940s, they would come out with the 336. Now, what they had noticed with the Model 36 is it did not see a lot of commercial success in the same way that the 1893 had seen. It wasn't different enough and revolutionary. So what they did when they came to the table with the 336 was how to completely redesign and revamp the Model 36. They did this by redesigning the bolt, the shell elevator, the lever system, so it was easier to disassemble and clean. They changed all the flat springs with traditional coil springs, which is now becoming popular at the time. They offered it in several different barrel lengths, different calibers. They changed the way that they had machined and created the ejection port on the side of the receiver, and it was met with a ton of vigor in the market. The 336 as well as the Winchester 94 again combined make up probably the best-selling 30-30 deer rifles on the market, and 30-30 is typically what you see the 336 chambered in. Since about the 1950s, until today. It is still in production, was with production, of course, with Marlin, and then when it was repurchased by Remington, and is also slated to continue production under Ruger. Now, there is, when it comes to value, a wide array of what these sell for. These have always been known for being very economic and easy to get into in terms of price point. Now, you're going to have a big difference between JM and non-JM stamped. JM is really the traditional Marlin manufacturer. Non-JM would be post-conversion over to Remington, so the JM stamped guns are typically a little bit higher value. This one's JM stamped, so made by Marlin, back when Marlin was Marlin. You typically in today's market will find these around the $500 to $700 range, depending on condition and if it's JM stamped or not. So anyway, for the price, a really well made, very well thought out, and a long lineage of design development on this rifle, making it a really popular choice for a lot of shooting enthusiasts and hunters. So really happy to get that in and share it with you. Okay, up next is a really cool rifle that comes to us from a viewer in Texas. So thank you so much for sending this one along to us. This is the Bushmaster ACR. This one is the standard model and the harder to find FDE color configuration. Now, I did have an ACR on one of these weekly used gun review videos a month or so ago, but I'll never waste an opportunity to throw in another ACR or a pretty unique and hard to find rifle like this. Now, the story with this would actually begin with Magpul back in 2007 when they developed this platform, but they knew it as the Masada. In 2008, there was a convention or a solicitation from the United States military for contractors, arms developers, equipment manufacturers to come forward with their new R&D projects or new firearms, new war material equipment, things like that, to try and show it to the United States military to try and secure early contracts for those firearms. Now, Magpul would enter the call and come forward with their Masada design at this convention, which would actually not only get the attention of the military, but a lot of domestic commercial arms manufacturers as well, one of which being Remington, which had its subsidiary Bushmaster on board. Now, going forward a little bit, Bushmaster would actually get the rights to manufacture the Masada, which they would manufacture as the ACR, Adaptive Combat Rifle, under the Bushmaster brand. Remington would manufacture them as well, but under military contract, as a Masada would get military attention and would secure limited contracts in a select fire configuration for both military and law enforcement. Bushmaster would further develop this design and would introduce it to the civilian market at SHOT Show in 2008. It got a ton of attention and was probably the star of the show in 2008. And then it was just early commercial prototype, but they had made some promises about the platform. First, they stated that it would have an introductory price of around $1,500. Second, it was going to be fully modular with a barrel change system allowing for barrel conversions, caliber conversions, if you will, with a multitude of different calibers being offered with the platform. And third, it would have a release date of 2009. Now, they did fall short on all three of those promises, which led to the ACR falling a little bit flat on its face, and it was actually offered up to the for retail in about 2009. The problem with the ACR is, first, now all of a sudden it did have a retail price of about $2,500 as opposed to the $1,500 mark everybody was anticipating. Second is it did have the modular barrel change system, but was not offered with any other caliber. Standard was in 5.56, and they had of course blown the initial release date. Coming out, maybe it was about 2009, 2010. It was actually about 2010 when it would release. Now, there was a lot of angst about this on the market because of all those things, and sales definitely suffered. They would continue modifying the design. They would come out with a DMR variation of this. They would finally come out with it in 450 Bushmaster. You could convert the barrels. They would come out with an SBR version as well, and sales would stay relatively mediocre. Now, they were able to get the price point down on the enhanced version to about $2,000. This is actually a standard model with the standard birdcage flash hider, Magpul 4N, but it does have a replace enhance shoulder stock on it. The original standard model was a fixed stock. This one is side folding and collapsible. But the enhanced versions would come out about $2,000, and the standard models maybe about $1,700 or $1,800. Now, in 2019, they would discontinue production on this. I don't know now that Ruger, I know that they have the Marlin brand. I don't know if they're going to take over any other facet of the business. I don't believe Bushmaster will probably be bought up by anybody because of lawsuits and litigation going on with the Sandy Hook. So I don't know what's going on there, and I won't speculate on that. However, I do know that these are not currently in production, and as a result of that, it has caused the pricing to escalate. Now on the used market, these are selling between about $2,000 and $2,500 respectively, in some cases even going higher. But undoubtedly, this is a really cool rifle design. It takes a lot of design elements from other successful rifle platforms and marries them together. You see elements of the C.U.R, the standard AR-15, the Robinson Armament XCR. If you are familiar with the AR-15 controls, you're going to be right at home on this. It does have a polymer trigger group housing, magwell, and pistol grip. It does have a metal upper receiver section, all monolithic here with a non-reciprocating charging handle. Really cool, very slick bolt travel. I've always been fond of these. Of course, you do have your removable barrel system. You can get them in 450 Bushmaster now, and it does have a gas piston, adjustable gas piston system up here at the front. So for what it is really cool. It is just an interesting staple in arms design and development, especially for some limited military use. But the ACR is definitely, it is a popular rifle and will, I believe, keep its place in the tables of history for being what it is. But happy to get this in and share it with you guys. That is the Bushmaster ACR. Okay, up next is a really cool rifle that comes to us from a viewer in Tennessee. So thank you so much for sending this one along to us. This is the MSAR STG 556, chambered in 5.56-223. And a lot of you would say this looks an awful lot like a Steyr AUG, and it really is meant to be a domestic US manufactured Steyr AUG clone. Now, the Steyr AUG was adopted by Austria in 1978 as the STG-77, replacing the STG-58, which was a derivative of the FAL chambered in 308. Through the 1970s, a lot of countries are going into a standardized intermediate cartridge like the 223 5.56 or the 7.62 by 39, and Austria was no exception to that. Now, after the development of the rifle, other countries would jump on board, like Australia, New Zealand, and Ireland, adopting the same pattern, the Steyr AUG. Now, in the 1980s, there was a huge demand for this new space-age technology. It was made famous in the Die Hard series, with Carl wielding one of these, showing how the quick change barrel system would work, and it was really wanted or desired for importation into the United States. Now, in the 1980s, these would start coming in, and not very many of them would actually be brought in by that same before that same pesky importation ban under then President Bush Sr. in 1989. So that would put an end to the importation of the Steyr rifles into the American consumer market. Now, on through to the early 1990s, these still would not come in, and then in 1994, you would get the assault weapons ban under President Bill Clinton. Now, in the early 1990s, Steyr would try to come up with a way of importing a ban-compliant version of the AUG, which they called the USR, which was basically featureless, so you didn't have a threaded muzzle, you could not quick change the barrel, things like that, and they were successful in importing that into the United States in around 1996, 1997. Unfortunately, Barbara Boxer and Dianne Feinstein had sort of schemed behind the scenes, wanting to put further restrictions on the importation of foreign firearms and coerced Clinton to put an addendum to the assault weapons ban, thus making it illegal to purchase the firearm that could accept a magazine capacity over 10 rounds. That would basically, again, put the USRs dead in the water, which would be, again, the second end to the importation of the Steyr AUG. Now, the assault weapons ban, as we all know, would sunset in 2004, and initially Steyr would not come up with bringing, a new non-ban compliant or a new sort of standard AUG into the market yet. So there was a domestic manufacturer known as MSAR who would want to create a domestically manufactured copy of the AUG because there was so much demand for it, so they would come up with this. It was their own proprietary magazine. It was all designed to look close to the Steyr AUG, but there was basically no parts compatibility between this and the AUG, and it was offered at quite a lower price point. Today, you can get these on the market used for about the $1,000 mark. They are not that high, mainly because now there exists a domestic manufactured Steyr AUG. The A3 is now available on the market, and those will retail in about the $1,800 to $2,200 price new, depending on if it comes without an optic or with an optic or anything like that. Now, Steyr had started putting a foothold in the US market in about 2007, 2008. when they would open up operations in the United States and start developing a new variation of the Steyr AUG for domestic consumption, which was effectively what put MSAR dead in the water. So now that there was us as American consumers could get the real deal, there was not as much demand for the MSAR product. So in 2015, they would actually go out of business. They never stated what it was that caused them to go out of business, but speculation would suggest that it was the emergence of the Steyr AUG back into the American market by Steyr. So anyway, these are now no longer able to be purchased from MSAR, and they're I don't know, I hesitate to call them collectible, but they are definitely, I would say, rare and unique because they are not around anymore as a Steyr clone. But of course, if you're looking for one of these, you can get one straight from the source of Steyr anyway. So they are really, really interesting firearm. They function on very much the same principle with the short stroke gas piston. They disassemble much in the same way. They have the same ergonomics, look, and feel. So if you are interested in a Steyr AUG and you don't want to pay the close to $2,000 price tag, you can definitely still find the MSAR STG 556s for about half the going rate on the used market, which makes them really cool. So anyway, happy to get that in and share it with you guys. And again, thank you to our viewer for selling this one to us, the MSAR STG 556. Okay, up next I have a really cool rifle that comes to us from a viewer in Texas, so thank you for sending this one along to us. This is an Intrac C.U.R 2 545x39 AK-74 pattern, if you will, which is actually the first of its type to be imported into the United States beginning 1997. If we go back prior to the assault weapons ban of 1994, there were several, and actually the importation, the sporting clause on foreign imports of 1989, there were several AKM or AK variants that were coming into the country. First with the Finnish Valmet, second with the Maadi brought in by Steyr, Steyr USA. Then you had the Chinese, the Norinco and the Polytechs coming in, the Polytech Legends if you wanted to get the milled receiver. And then in 1989, due to the Stockton schoolyard shooting, there was an importation clause put on the sporting purpose of firearms that were allowed to come into the country, which would stop a lot of the importation of those items, thus changing also the configuration that a lot of them would be in. You see a lot of this with the MAC 90s coming in from Norinco, thumbhole stocks, and all of that. Then in 1994, further restrictions would be implemented due to the assault weapons ban, putting things like, you have to have thumbhole stocks, no bayonet lugs, none of the evil features that could be on the firearms. So during the 1990s, you do see a continuation of firearms coming in mainly from Romania, and this would be actually the first derivative of the 545x39 AK to really come into the country that was seen in large-scale production and became more readily available. Now, there were two predecessors to this in the 545x39, the first being the Type 88S, which was really a very, very, very limited import from China in 1988, which is very quickly halted just 1 year later in 1989, again due to the importation ban. Fewer than I think a couple hundred were actually brought into the country. Then there was a Century Arms import known as the SSG-82, which was a bolt-action rifle, which was chambered in 545x39. But getting into the actual first really available AK-74 545x39, this would be the first. Now, Intrac would be a very early importer of these firearms, and really what you have here is as close as you can get to the AK-74 pattern, with the certain modifications that would have been required on it. So this did come into the country with a thumbhole stock. You do not have any threads up here. This is actually a pressed-on muzzle nut, which is tack welded to the front sight base. There are no bayonet wings here on the bayonet lug, so no mounting of a bayonet or any sort like that. You do have the iconic upswept charging handle, mostly found on like the export AIM 74 commercial AIMs or their military variation in the 545x39. There was another company called DIG, which imported a series of 545x39 AKs from Romania as well. And then at some point, the Intrac imports would be changed to the name of the Mark II. Not much of a variation in terms of what you were getting there. But this would really begin sort of the legacy of the 545x39 AK in the United States. Of course, in 2004, the importation ban would stop, and you would get a series of like the Mauser 2 and things like that post-ban in 545x39. Other country variations as well would start coming in throughout the late, I'd say the more the late 90s, early 2000s as well. And the rest is sort of history on that, but this is sort of where it all began. Really, really good fit, finish, function, really, really nice high quality AK. These have sort of varied widely in terms of their value on the market. I've seen these in, depending on condition, matching numbers, which is actually pretty uncommon on these. This one's not matching. Original furniture, magazines, things like that. I've seen them span between roughly $800 and $1,200 respectively. So really, really cool firearm nonetheless. Not much else to say about it, but anyway, happy to share it with you guys on this video. Okay, up next is a really cool AKM that comes to us from the same seller in Texas. So thank you so much for sending this one along to us. This is an Egyptian Maadi AKM. Specifically, this is a Pars import RML model 762x39. And the story with this would begin back in the 1980s when on the US consumer market there was a big hunger and desire for an AKM pattern. Now at the time there had existed the Finnish Valmet rifles, which were a very close derivative off of the AK design. However, people really wanted this traditional package. Now, C.U.R, noticing that there was a demand for this, would import over Maadi in Egypt, manufactured AKMs into the consumer market. In fact, Maadi variations were used in the popular 1980s movie Red Dawn, which spurred a tremendous amount of demand for these types of firearms on the consumer market. Now, that would cause Norinco and Polytech to enter the fray by importing their own variations into the market with the different 56 S1, S2, S3 variants from Norinco, and then Polytech with the Polytech Legend on the milled receiver. And all those are actually much more affordable than the Maadi imports from C.U.R, which is one of the complaints that a lot of people had, is that, hey, you have this crude Russian design, it should be more affordable. So those Norincos, new on the market back then, were between about $200 and $300. Which is much more affordable and was very popular. Now, a cool thing about the Maadi is it is very, very closely related, if not identical, to the Russian variation of the AKM. So it's kind of the closest you could get to the true, to the most pure variation of the Russian Soviet AKM that you could get. Now, a lot of the golden era of the AK imports that was very short-lived through the late 80s was put to an end in 1989 when then President Bush Sr. had put an end to the importation of these firearms, stating that there had to be a sporting purpose for foreign imports. So the traditional configuration AKs would come to an end, and then from that day forward they would have to heavily modify them to bring them into the United States for importation. Now, that would put an end to the C.U.R imported AKMs from Maadi. That would then lead to the entrance of Pars and Intrac, who through 1993 to 1995 would import a post-ban variation of the AKM. Now this would be one of those. You would originally have had a thumbhole stock. In fact, early imports would actually come with the original furniture set that you could put on that, which I believe that that's what this is, because this would have been the original furniture set that would have come on it. This looks like it matches this perfectly. This looks like an Egyptian stock, laminated stock. So this probably came in the box, but it was actually fitted with the thumbhole stock when imported, which is probably replaced, which is cool that that's there. Also, this leads me to believe that these came with it because this is a Bakelite black Egyptian grip, which are actually pretty uncommon. So this probably all came with it. I just wish it still had the thumbhole stock. That's super, super cool. Now, Pars would import two different models, the RML and the ARM. The only real difference between the two is the RML actually had its threads on the front end turned down, so you had a kind of just a non-threaded muzzle out here at the front, whereas the ARM was threaded and had a muzzle net on it and was tack welded. Also, the RML came in with a 20-inch barrel variation, and both variations came with the 16-inch barrel you see here. So ARM was 16-inch only with threads, RML was 16-inch or 20-inch, but the threads turned off. Intrac also imported these from 1993 to 1995. They also had the ARM version with the threaded barrel and the barrel nut with the 16-inch barrel, and they had the RPM model, which also they had in the 16-inch and they had in the 20-inch, and those were also threaded. Actually, I'm sorry, they didn't have that in the 16-inch, if I remember this correctly. Sorry, my brain's a little fuzzy on this. But they did have the longer barrel variation, and the latest variations of the RPMs that came in from Intrac came with a bipod, making it sort of the Egyptian RPK, if you will, which is kind of the closest you could get to that as an import. So really, really cool firearms nonetheless. So just for those 2 short years, they would come in. That would basically be the end of the run until the late 1990s when Century would have their variations that they would import. And those are known as the Mauser or MSAR, M-I-S-R rifles, which are not very well regarded on the consumer market as well. So, of course, the most desirable is going to be the pre-ban C.U.R. Second, you're going to have the Pars and the Intrac 1993 to 1995 guns are going to be pretty desirable, which is what this is. And then you have the Mauser rifles, which, yeah, I mean, they're good for what they are. Anyway, really, really cool. Happy to get this in and share it with you guys. Value on these things is all over the board, depending on the different model. When it was imported, of course, the Steyrs are going to be, by and large, the most valuable and sought after. These do retain a pretty good amount of value. Definitely in the $1,000 range, plus or minus, depending on condition or what it's got with it. So really, really cool firearms nonetheless. Really happy to get this in and share it with you guys, and that'll be it for the end of this video. Well, that is all the time I have for you today on these. Thank you so much for stopping by and checking out this video. If you enjoyed, please let me know by hitting that like button. Also, please consider subscribing to my channel and hit that bell notification button so you are aware when I am posting new content. I'm going to leave you guys off with that. I am Chris with Marksman Shooting Sports and WeBuyGuns.com in Westfield, Indiana. You are watching Marksman TV, and I will see you next time.